we charge them as we charge China, but the tariffs are paid eventually by American importers and consumers.
No, they're not. No, I think they're paid for by the country.
Have to reduce spending to live within our means. That necessarily involves some temporary hardship, but it will ensure long-term prosperity.
Remember Trump talking about unelected bureaucrats in his State of the Union? Well, here's one talking about necessary hardships to the American people. Easy to say when you're going to become the first trillionaire and it only costs you $250 million to buy an election.
We are draining the swamp. It's very simple. And the days of rule by unelected bureaucrats are over.
Of course, before the election, Trump was talking about how he was planning on helping the American worker economically. And now that he's won, he and Elon Musk are talking about how much they plan on hurting the American people, but for our benefit. Yet another lie they're trying to sell us. Because we know what it looks like when people are actually trying to help the American worker. I mean, COVID and the pandemic really hurt our economy. And Biden and Treasury Secretary Yellen managed to get us through without a recession. And we recovered so much better than any other Western country who tried to do the same thing. And they didn't do that by intentionally hurting us. They were smart and able to figure out a way. Well, clearly Elon Musk and Trump could figure out a way if they really wanted to, and a way would actually be to do nothing. The CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Act was bringing back to this country manufacturing jobs, really good paying jobs. And they just had to sit back. Trump just had to sit back, and the economy was going to continue to grow, and more jobs were going to become available to the American worker. But instead, Trump decides to have a trade war, and Musk decides to decimate our government and fire thousands of American workers. Because the thing is, this deep state government that they keep talking about are everyday American people, a lot of whom who actually voted for Trump. Federal workers are paying the price, despite the fact that federal workers, the payroll for federal workers is minuscule in terms of how much the country spends on things. But they are a target. And Musk, having really no idea how our government works, isn't even being thoughtful or strategic about it. And he's certainly not saving us money. He's firing workers at the IRS, despite the fact that now the government won't be able to collect as much in taxes. They certainly are going to lose more than they will make up by the firing of these workers whose salaries are not nearly the amount that they're going to lose in not getting the taxes. Musk is also firing federal workers that aren't even paid with taxpayer money.
Elon Musk, the wealthiest person on earth, at the behest of President Trump, is now on the warpath against the working families of our country. Saving money by dismantling the Department of Education, which, by the way, is illegal and unconstitutional, so that the billionaire class can receive huge tax breaks, is terrible public policy and morally reprehensible. Mr. Musk, who is worth some $400 billion, and his fellow billionaires do not have to worry about the quality of public education because they send their kids and grandchildren to fancy private schools. So what happens to public education is not of great concern to them. But for the working class of this country, high-quality public education is an imperative if their kids are going to do well in life. And the cutting of funding for 26 million low-income and working-class students, many of whom are in rural states like Vermont, will be a disaster. Mr. Musk and his fellow billionaires don't have to worry about the high cost of college because they can afford to get their kids into any college they want. But that is not the case for the 7 million working-class families who depend on Pell Grants to get a higher education. Years ago, parents who had disabilities had no decent option as to how to do well by their kids. We have made progress in that area over the years. But if Mr. Musk gets his way, 7.5 million kids with disabilities may be unable to receive the services they need in a high-quality public education. What happens to those children? What happens to those families if those services are cut?
They figured out a way to pay their salaries to benefit the American taxpayer without having the American taxpayer fund their salaries, but Musk is cutting them anyway. These include 200 employees for the Food and Drug Administration, and they are paid by fees from companies who are trying to get their products approved by the FDA. And specifically, we are talking about products like stents and implants for consumers, certainly products that people dealing with heart disease and other illnesses need approval from. Musk is firing these workers despite the fact that is actually not saving American taxpayers any money. He's doing a similar thing with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is funded actually by the Federal Reserve and not American taxpayers, but he's firing over 100 probationary workers, saving absolutely no money in taxes, but yet hurting us economically because, as we know, and we've learned quite a bit about since Musk has started his rampage through our government, is that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau helps the American workers with numerous things, such as the fact with overdraft fees. They advocated to have those lowered or eliminated, saving money. Here, Musk is firing people at that bureau despite the fact that it doesn't save taxpayers any money.
They're slashing staff, crushing unions, and selling out the VA for what? So billionaires can make more money while veterans sit on wait list. Worse, they'll get no treatment. Our president was asleep while Musk was at the wheel. Do you know what happens to a serviceman when they fall asleep when they're on duty? Veterans don't trust him. He's not one of us.
So that was Eric Rodriguez. He's a veteran of the war in Iraq. He was reacting to the news that the Trump administration is cutting thousands of jobs from the Department of Veterans Affairs. On that, the AP reports this, quote, "The Department of Veterans Affairs is planning a reorganization that includes cutting more than 80,000 jobs." Wow, 80,000 jobs from the agency that provides health care for retired military members. The VA's chief of staff told top-level officials at the agency Tuesday that it had an objective to cut enough employees to return to 2019 staffing levels of just under 400,000. That would require terminating tens of thousands of employees after the VA had expanded during the Biden administration, as well as to cover veterans impacted by burn pits. For some veterans, that means not just worrying about what this means for their health care and their family's health care. They could also lose their jobs entirely. More than 25% of the VA's staff and workforce is made up of veterans.
The irony is that all this talk by Musk and Trump about rooting out waste and fraud and inefficiency is that there are inspector generals who for years that has been their sole purpose, is to oversee our federal employees, the granting of money and applications by consumers, and determine if there's any fraud or waste or inefficiency. We didn't need to appoint Musk, who had no idea how government functions, to then hire people who have no idea how government functions and then give them access that they're not allowed to have, all while lying to the court that Musk, in fact, doesn't have the control that he does, in fact, have. We could have just allowed the inspector generals to continue their jobs. The inspector generals who were recently fired by Trump had an interview with the New York Times, and they laid out exactly how much they have saved the American taxpayer by rooting out fraud and inefficiency while doing their jobs as inspector generals, which Trump just fired. And so this is just the snapshot of what they said that they have saved. The Department of Labor Inspector General said he saved $75 billion since he was appointed. The Department of Defense Inspector General said that they saved over $10 billion. The Small Business Administration Inspector General said they saved taxpayers $30 billion. The Department of Health and Human Services, $14.5 billion. NASA, $47 billion. The Unemployment Insurance Program was $47 billion. NASA was hundreds of billions. And since COVID, $90 billion have been saved for the American people, all because the inspector generals have rooted out fraud and inefficiency in our government. And they have done it much more efficiently, much more safely, much more thoughtfully than Musk and his minions have done or tried to do.
Can't get enough Midas? Check out the Midas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MidasPlus.com.